financial information necessary to provide the numbers for the 6-year plan. So it took a little bit to pull together this year, but it has come together very nicely, and we've set some really good foundations for updating the document here in the future. I'll go over the docket that was for the 2021 docket. So in 2021, the items that were on the docket was the Housing Action Plan, the JPA, UGA discussions with the county, the Capital Improvements Plan, and the Active Transportation Plan. So for this year's amendment, we are looking only at a couple items on this list. We're looking at making changes by adding the Housing Action Plan to the Comprehensive Plan and also updating the CIP. The JPA is not going. I'm sorry, was there a question?
It is.
So the JPA and the UGA is an ongoing discussion will continue likely into 2022. The Active Transportation Plan will also continue into 2022. We've had the federal grant dollars obligated to us for this project, and we'll be hiring consultants to help us this year, and so that will be on the 2022 docket as well. So the two action items are going to be related to the Housing Action Plan and the Capital Improvements Plan, and I'll go over them real quick in the next few slides. So the Housing Action Plan has been incorporated into the into the Comprehensive Plan. This is in the first section of the plan, which validates all the plans that are currently valid in Oak Harbor. And so these are little excerpts from the first section of the Comprehensive Plan. And the main thing that we updated was the implementing documents and added the Housing Action Plan to it. In your packet, you should have the updated implementing document. So the Capital Improvements Plan is also updated every year. It's a 6-year plan, and the Capital Improvements Plan tracks primarily projects that are $50,000 or greater and have a 20-year lifespan. So projects that are less than that are usually in the budget and not tracked in the CIP. There are a few exceptions to the above rule, and that's mainly for funding sources tracked. The state would like us to track some projects in the CIP, and there are just one or two exceptions to the rule. As you know, the Capital Improvements Plan is divided into various funds: streets, parks, water, and these are the various fund statements that we update through the capital improvement planning process. So what are the changes that have occurred in 2022? So some of the changes for this year, actually for 2022, is there was some changes in the Harbor Heights project. The Serendipity Lane in downtown is a project that was added to 2022. The funding for that is yet to be determined, but it's in the plan for 22. Parks also added a portion of Harbor Heights. Harbor Heights has become a significant project, has grown in scope, and we need streets that need to connect to the park. So there have been additions from that project onto 22. And then we have water line upsizing. If the Planning Commission remembers, we had the Marion Woods subdivision approved a year ago or a couple years ago, and the water line that goes through their subdivision needs to be upsized to provide service to other connections further down the road. So that project has also been added to the 22 changes. What are some of the other changes? Again, the CIP is a 6-year plan, so changes occur in the outer years as well. So some of the changes that have occurred there is there are some park projects that have been added to later years, and I'll show you that in the spreadsheet as we go down. And City Hall parking lot. This is the parking lot to the south of the city building to be expanded once some of the structures south of here have been demolished. They're already dilapidated and need to be cleared. So that's a project that's been added. And then the senior center parking lot, there's a lot of ADA compliance issues with those parking lots and grade issues. And so you can't fix that without looking at the entire parking lot. So that project has also been added in the future years. So I won't go through the details of all the projects that are here. If the commission has questions or comments on any project, I can bring these sheets back to discuss them. But again, in the streets, the Harbor Heights Access Road is one of the new projects that were added. Most of the other projects are from last year. Again, the Serendipity Lane was added this year. In the parks section, we have, again, Smith Park, Sumner Park playground equipment that was added to the later years. But most of what is in the 2022, other than the Harbor Heights, is pretty much the same. Not much change in the wastewater. This is pretty much remaining the same over here from last year. In the water system, again, very minor changes. The Marin Woods water line upsizing was the one project that was added to this year, as I mentioned before. And stormwater system, again, not many changes from last year. We're continuing to implement the projects. Most of them are on schedule. Senior Center, as I mentioned, the parking lot has been added to a later year, 24, 25. So these are outside of the budget years and become the planning years. So they've been scheduled for, as it gets closer to the budget, they'll consider those dollars even more carefully. And again, to the marina, we don't have any major changes. So those are the sheets that are in your packet. I also have in your packet the appendix, which has some of the project descriptions, and I can bring those up if you have any questions about it. Let me see if I can. So I hope you can see that the PDF documents. So the document. So in the appendix of this capital improvements plan, we have project sheets, and these are really important details of all the projects that are in the spreadsheets that I just showed you. That's in the plan, and they have more detailed project information and a short table talking about the revenue sources that is going to fund a particular project and so on. So, for example, I'll just pick one of them. Windjammer Park improvements. You have the estimates there and the customized funding for that particular project. So, similarly, there's information on all the other projects as well. So if you have any questions on a particular project, you can jump into this appendix sheet and find out more information. So with that, I will stop sharing and transfer it back to the chair, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. My question is, when you were talking about the funding for under 50,000, is that based on the project type or is that based on the funding source?
So the CIP only tracks projects that is greater than $50,000 as a total project cost. Some of the REIT funds, if you spend REIT dollars on projects, you may have to track it in the CIP. So that some of those projects may be less than 50,000. But I see Blaine has come on. Maybe he's got a little more information on that. So I'll let him chime in.
No, you're doing fine. You did a good summary there, and I think there's one or two that are under 50,000, and you explained why they're in there.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, CAC. In the comp plan, what is the waterfront redevelopment branding and marketing program? Is that something that we could take a look at?
I'm sorry, I lost you. I didn't get the question.
In the comprehensive plan, it mentions the waterfront redevelopment branding and marketing program. What is that, and can we get a copy of it?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, that's a plan that was adopted, I want to say back in 2006 or 2007. There is a link on the city's website to it, and we can send you a link to that.
Thank you. One other question. On table 5.1, in our packet, it shows that the Facama Access Road is still listed at $481,500, but it looked like in your slide, it was up to $650 or something. Could you explain that, please?
Let me go back to that. So in the document, this is the correct amount. My slideshow may have had a previous, and I will apologize. I made this presentation a long time ago. Yes, that is the wrong amount, and I apologize for that. The 481 is the correct. We've had some changes since I got this spreadsheet, and I updated my other presentations, but did fail to do this. So that is the not the correct number. The one in the packet is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Schott has her hand raised.
Thanks. CAC, thank you for the presentation. I was wondering, you briefly touched on the Housing Action Plan and then moved into the CIP. I was wondering, have either of those been impacted by, maybe even positively impacted by federal funds, federal recovery funds? Or is any federal funding moving into kind of this funding matrix? Or is the city approaching that separately?
I will let Blaine chime in on this, but as of right now, I think some of the recovery funds have not been channeled into the capital improvements plan because the city council has not looked at the list comprehensively, I guess, and made some decisions on it. So once that happens, I think we will see if any of these projects are funded by some of that, we will start to reflect that in the revenue portion of the tables.
Thank you.
I can add a little bit to that. CAC did a good job of kind of talking about that. We did have unsecured funding in it. So when you look at the particular pages, so what we found in the past is sometimes they put grant funding, but the grant really wasn't already approved. So we listed to deal with that issue, we've listed unsecured funding. And then like CAC says, we haven't designated any ARPA and you don't see much in there. There might be a few that council already did, but this council still hasn't. I think they got another $5 million or so to designate, and they're working on that. So they certainly could take some of those projects and change the funding for it. They've talked about helping out the utility rates, and so they could take a project that was earmarked with the capital projects, or earmarked for using funds for the utility rate funded and then use ARPA instead to keep that. So the council's still evaluating that, and certainly we can change the funding source, but I think CAC's got to put out this plan at a certain time with what we know now and what's designated. So he did his best job to designate what we have now, but certainly it could change.
Thanks. And with the housing plan, I'm not so familiar with it, but I heard the city has also received some perhaps affordable housing funds. I know we've got to move on all of these plans, but is there anything that, Blaine, that you think that we should be taking a look at regarding affordable housing funds in the light of the housing?
We in 2019, we've got a little bit under a tax credit that the legislature did, and we designated that all for the county. If we were to take it locally, we would have had to run a sales tax, and at that time, it had to be referendum, and the council chose not to do it. So the county is looking at projects, and they're looking at a sales tax increase, but that's nothing other than the $50,000 we're doing for the Homeless Coalition is the only thing we really have in there that's housing related.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, part of the situation with this capital improvement project is most of you know, what's being built that you see being built today was actually approved 3 to 5 years ago. And sometimes that's kind of frustrating for the commission to see or to even understand, why it takes so long. But these projects come and go based on, the necessary and the needs. And sometimes, something is planned for development in 22, 23 physical years, but then something happens, something changes, and there's a higher priority that comes forward. Okay, like, last year we had the storms, and it overflowed the waste treatment plant. Everybody had to jump into a different gear to solve that problem. So sometimes things happen that way. It's not on purpose, but it just happens. But I think they've done an outstanding job with the capital improvement project, and there's always a number of questions, but all we can do is just see what the council does. I think they're meeting tomorrow night to review this at greater length. Are there any other questions regarding this matter? We have nothing from the public, so we'll close the public hearing at this point. I'm looking for a recommendation to move this forward to the City Council. I need a motion and a second.
I recommend we make a motion, move to City Council.
Okay, we have a motion to refer this matter to the City Council to approve. Need a second?
I will second.
We have a motion to approve and forward this to the City Council and a second. All in favor, say aye. Raise your hand. Thank you. This motion carried. Thank you. Second item on the agenda tonight is a public meeting, site-specific rezoning code amendment. Staff will discuss the amendment to section 19.20.730 to delete redundant language relating to permitted uses in the industrial zones, and an amendment to section 18.20.260, 18.20.270, and 19.75.020 regarding rezoning process.
Members of the commission, thank you. David Cool, Development Services Director. Tonight, I'd like to talk a little bit about some code changes we have coming up for you in the future. And so I'm going to be going through a number of screens here. The Planning Commission tonight will be talking about particular a site-specific rezone, and then we'll be talking about a industrial code change, as well as a housing building code change. And then we'll be talking about the site-specific rezone as well, and the gravel parking lot discussion. So, next up. There we go. So, that was what I just said. So I'm just trying to work this from one screen, which is not a normal procedure. So bear with me as we try and work through this. So that's the agenda for tonight. Okay. This is the draft ordinance we have for the site-specific rezone. And we talked a little bit about this once before as a training, the type 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 type of permits we have. Type 1 is a very ministerial permit, like a building permit, over the counter. Type 2 is a little more intensive site plan type project. Type 3 and 4 go to the hearing examiner, and type 5 is legislative. So what we have tonight is we have a draft code change that's been prepared. And what we're doing is we're taking the rezone process, which is quasi-judicial, and putting it in a type 5 permit. And as you can see, as we go through the language, as I'm scrolling through, what we're trying to do is basically if you take number 2 here, and it's type 5 review process, if you look down at B, what we've changed is we've put that in a type 5, and it says final decisions on site-specific rezones required under RCW Chapter 3670A and Chapter 3670B. The public hearing shall be conducted by the hearing examiner with a recommended decision to the City Council. Prior to this, the way it was written, it stopped at the hearing examiner, and that was in a type 4 process. What we're trying to do is make sure that the City Council is the body of decision makers that make the final decision. And the reason is, when you're rezoning property on a site-specific basis, the only way you can do that is by ordinance. And the only people in the city that can approve an ordinance is the City Council. So prior to this, the hearing examiner was approving ordinances in some fashion. So that's what we want to clean up and make sure that we're following state law. This has been in place for a long time. Phil Albrecht, who is a hearing examiner, wrote an opinion back in 2013 that said exactly the same thing. So I'm not sure why it is the way it is currently, but we want to fix it and make it right. So this is a draft ordinance just for you to look at. We'll bring it back in a public hearing, and I'm available for any questions you might have at this time.
As I was reading it, it's just cleaning up, items that should have been caught, some time ago with changes. And this happens just about every month. So the Commission have any questions regarding this? Anybody else out there? No questions? Okay. Well, this was a public hearing or public meeting, so we look forward to seeing that change again in the future. We'll go on to item number C, the gravel lots in City Park discussion, public meeting. Staff will initiate a discussion on using gravel as a surface for large parking lots, such as the proposed Harbor Heights Park, and how to incorporate them into municipal code.
Thank you for your patience as we work through this. I'll just go through screen by screen. We want to talk about gravel surfacing, and that's for parking lots as well as gravel roads in large parks that are probably over 20 to 40 acres, maybe even as large as 75 acres, which is the same size as our big Harbor Heights Park. So I have a gravel parking lot discussion here. What I want to do is go through the points and then qualify them a little bit. So the first point of a gravel parking lot, it's considered low-impact development. And I'll show you in the future as we go down the screen here a little bit about low-impact development. These can be installed with in-house resources, so you don't necessarily have to contract it out. The Parks Department and Public Works Department can build these. They will meet ADA requirements, and there's little to no off-site water runoff. It does not alter the existing groundwater flow, and no storm system is required for conveyance or detention, so no detention pond or basin is needed with this game plan. It's a very low maintenance cost, and it's easily expandable. It can be a permanent solution for parking lots versus paved. We're considering it to be more of a temporary solution. This is an estimate put together by Mick Munkin, our interim Public Works Director. So using a gravel grid as a low-impact development method that uses high-strength plastic grid filled with gravel, this method does not require stormwater drainage or detention system. So as you can see in the chart, it says a gravel grid could be around $13 a foot. On a high cost, it would be $20 a foot. The asphalt pavement that we typically see can be anywhere from $18 to $45. So it's a significant cost savings for us in the short run. This is what it looks like. You can see on the left, there's the grid pattern made out of high-strength rubber. And on the right, you can see how cars are sitting on a typical parking lot that's made like this. They're using, it looks like, the rumble strips you typically see on a highway for dividers to mark the spaces. And you can see in this situation the parking lot is flat. This is an example that they're using to show the water going through the porous gravel. And on the left, there's an example of it dispersing into porous soil. So the water just goes straight through the gravel, down through the porous soil, and disseminates down below. On the right, if you have a different type of soil, it's non-porous, you can see the arrows go straight down through the gravel, and then there's a mesh that directs water to one side or the other. So these are proposed only in parks, and they'll follow the gravel road standards set forth by Public Works. This is a temporary solution for road alignments, and so this is on internal roads on large park sites. It addresses drainage without infrastructure. There's a lower impact to surface runoff versus asphalt, and you're able to install it quickly. It can be performed by in-house staff. It's low cost, and it can be paved in the future. This again is another diagram showing you a temporary gravel road. As you can see, this is a webbing type material that sits underneath the gravel. And if you have the kind of soil where it's not going to work well to have water going into it, you can see over here in this diagram, this is where your gravel is located, and then you have the webbing down below that directs water to a certain direction. So next steps, we'll review this concept with the City Council. Then after the council comments, we'll prepare a draft code along with our Public Works Department. We'll review it again internally, and then we'll prepare a final code for the Planning Commission and Council. And so obviously, if you look at this, you probably wonder why we want to do this. The big park we have up on the north side of town is a major undertaking, and we want to phase in the improvements as we have more money. This will allow us to put in gravel roads internally on the site. It'll allow us to put gravel parking up there to help the ball fields and buy us some time and do it in a way that still meets a reasonable parking and travel code, and eventually we can asphalt it as money becomes available. So that's the reason behind this code change. The Public Works Department are the folks who know a little bit of the science behind it. Dennis Lefevre, who also does low-impact development, he'll be pitching in a hand to make sure that it truly is LID and that we're not polluting any groundwater with any oil or gas coming out of vehicles. So we definitely want to take that into account, do a few more studies, and make sure that this works. So I know I've hit you with a little bit of information here that you probably haven't seen before. So I want you to take the time to review it, go online, study what you can to figure that out. And we can come back next time and you can ask more questions. But I'm available for any questions you might have tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, David. I have a question. On your initial slide, you said it's ADA compliant. Is the gravel put down and then compacted down? Is that the process that they're using? It'll be compacted, rolled, or tampered? I'm not sure. You see some parking lots on construction sites that the cities do require to maintain the dust, but they also have the metal grate where the trucks will, when they're driving across it, they'll shake it loose and they don't take it on the roadbed. My concern is will this rock be caught in the tires, the aggressive tires anyway, and become a liability to the city?
Good question. What I would suggest we do is we bring our Public Works Department in to give us the technical expertise on this particular question. With those grids, it looks like the gravel stays within those grids, but I'm not totally sure how the ADA is met. If you have someone in a wheelchair, exactly how that works. Obviously, you'd have to have slopes figured out at 2% grade. And in this case, it looked like it might be kind of rough to move a wheelchair over it, but maybe we can get a more clearer picture from Public Works.
Yeah, that would be the biggest liability that I would see with, those two items, specifically the ADA requirements, because, depending on if it's large gravel, 5/8 or something like that, it doesn't compact well, or if it is compacted, would somebody in a wheelchair have a problem? The city doesn't need that exposure, in any project that they do build and use this, there's the exposure. Does anybody else have a question regarding this item? We will be seeing this again in the future, so.
Commissioner Schott has her hand raised.
Thanks. So I had a question that maybe this can bring it in, who can provide more information, but I'm just wondering, the grid structure is made out of plastic, and while this seems like a really smart, cost-efficient solution, wondering about essentially degradation of the plastic over time, and if in runoff, this might create a challenge around microplastics. And so Like it seems like a really smart solution. I'm just wondering if there's any research or findings on microplastics, and it doesn't have to be answered here. I know I'm throwing a question out, but if it's something that the team can look into, I'd really appreciate it. And overall, this seems like a good alternative to what's out there. Even permeable asphalt is very difficult to maintain. It can be pretty expensive, right? So if we could have more information about microplastics and also any runoff that would occur from vehicles, what would be our mitigation plan for that kind of runoff on these surfaces? Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from anyone?
Mr. Chairman, these are good questions, and that's why we do this, is so that we can bring it in front of you and you can bring up questions. We can come back with technical answers that can help
Perfect.
understanding. So thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay, we'll go down to the final item on the agenda tonight. It's another public meeting, monthly development or department report. That'll also be through Dave.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask a favor, if we could go back to the item B. I think we breezed through a couple of items I didn't really get a chance to touch on. So I'm going to sign out of this particular PowerPoint and go back to two
Go back
more
to,
code sections.
Go back to B, okay. Which sections are you looking at that,
We're going to look at the industrial code section, and we're going to look at the building code section. So I'll pull up the existing building code. And it's a fairly short but sweet code change, but it's something we need to do. This obviously is in our zoning code. This is the existing building section of our development code. And what it says here is currently, if you have a substantially remodeled or rehabilitated building, that means any alteration or restoration of a building or structure within any 12-month period, the cost of which exceeds, currently it says 60%, and we'd like to change that to 50% of the current county-assessed value of the particular building or structure. So we're changing that to meet the building code. And we'd like to make sure that those both match up and that makes sense. So essentially, the way it currently reads is it's a little more permissive at 60% than if we take it down to 50%. So a building gets half destroyed, then you have to bring it back in at current codes. Whereas if it's less than 50% destroyed, then you get a chance to build it back in its current form.
I didn't question this, the 1805, I didn't see that as an item on the agenda.
Oh, there were, I think,
There were, it's under section 19, but then you had two sections under 1820, one section under 19.75. I didn't see one for 805.
yeah, fair enough. Probably just didn't make it into the agenda. So we can talk about it next time if you'd like.
That would be preferred, yes.
Sure. Let's chat about the industrial code changes.
For those commissioners who weren't aware of what would just happen, whenever we have an agenda in front of us and we're talking about items, they have to be on the agenda. Okay, so it's up to us to, when something is talked or brought up before us, to make sure that we just, that we make note that that was not an agenda, an item that was on the agenda. So therefore, it has to go back and come back another time. Thank you.
Makes sense. It was probably advertised in a different medium, but it didn't make the agenda, so that's fair enough. This is the principal permitted uses category in our code. And this, again, is a fairly minor Scribner's error. But as you remember, when Ray Lindenberg came through with his matrix, where we put all the different permitted uses in a matrix to make it easier for the public and for staff to interpret, this is some of the long-winded language that missed the boat and didn't get taken out. So all this is a code change to delete this particular section so that it cleans it up, and we're just referring to the industrial section in the matrix as opposed to this particular section. So we'll come back to, at a future hearing, to adopt or to consider and adopt all these code changes.
Thank you, David.
Do you have any questions on any of this information we're working on today?
No other questions from here? Anybody back there have a question?
Excuse me while I find it. There it is. This is a lengthier process with one screen than it is with three, so thank you. This particular monthly update, we just want to run down some of the things we've accomplished in the last month. Council action update. They considered the annexation on February 1st for Lorland Drive, and that's still moving forward. That is one lot right off Lorland Drive, right next to the city. The Planning Commission annual report was considered by the City Council on February 15th. And under number 2, the current planning, we have a few projects that are in the pre-application stage. So I want to make sure you're not thinking like this is actually going to happen, but it has a possibility. The Dehinza 25-lot PRD subdivision at 2000 Northeast 10th. The second bullet down is the Glint pre-application on the Oldberg Ford site, and that's potentially for a Sonic, a Popeyes, and a car wash. And again, those are just pre-applications, so that's just the very first application that applicants come in with. Bayview pre-application is 46 units mixed use on Ely and Barrington. And under the building section, the Barrington 20-unit apartments just down the street from us here is nearing a CO, the one right across from the post office. McKinney Place townhomes on 3rd Street, those are under construction. If you've been over there lately, there's a couple buildings going up and all the foundations are in. Under long-range planning, these are some of the things we've talked about tonight. Existing building code, minor update, the site-specific rezone. Ray Lindenberg is working on density and dimension standards, and that came out of one of the Housing Action Plan recommendations. So that's the very first one we want to attack, and that'll be coming to you soon. And then, of course, gravel roads that we just talked about. Administratively, the new electronic permitting system is testings in February, training late March. Well, that's already slipped a little bit. We'll be back in April for training, and it'll go live in May. So we want to slow it down, make sure we're doing it right. We don't want to make mistakes with our consultant. We want to make sure we get everything in place before we go live with it. We want to make sure our customers are satisfied right out of the gate. In fact, we intend to use some of our customers to test the system for us. So we've had a couple builders volunteer to be part of that, and we anticipate that coming up this spring. Also in our department, we have a new permit coordinator, Patty O'Mahony. She came to us where she was an appraiser in Island County, and so we're really excited to have her. And the Serendipity Lane project that CAC mentioned in the CIP earlier tonight, that's a project that Main Street is working on and continuing to make progress. We're just looking for funding. And I think we have most of the design done from Ferd Johns. We have a contractor who's interested, and I think he's on the roster, so he should be able to just take it over once we get funding. So that's just 1 month of activity. We'll be back here in front of you March 22nd, and we're available for any comments or questions you might have.
Well, thank you, David. We always appreciate the update of what is going on, with the department and with the city. It keeps us informed so we can answer questions if any do come up. We can also sidestep those questions if it doesn't pertain to us. But as always, I appreciate the update, and I hope everybody else does too. But are there any questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, David. The Bayview pre-application, is that the vacant lot that's across from Island Thrift for the 46 units?
It's just down the street here, right across from the barber shop.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I have a question, Dave. Now, with the state's direction regarding electric vehicles and things of this nature, are these projects now coming forward with charging stations or the ability for charging stations on them?
It's a good point, Mr. Chairman. We haven't discussed that with our applicants at this point. But I would think that'd be
It's just
good.
coming fast and furious, and you can see different places outside or off the island. Not very many of them, but there are some charging stations out there. But what's happening with our development? And as you drive around the city and you see especially the apartment complexes, where the ones up on like Fort Nugent, they're tiered up the hill, and some of them have exterior parking. Well, they all have exterior parking. They don't have enclosed parking at all. But if this was to be a driver for the state, to charge vehicles, where would these folks that live here or work here, where would they go to charge their vehicles? And that's one of the concerning things. The infrastructure isn't in place, as I see it right now, for the number of vehicles that's coming forward. And it could get even faster, with more vehicles, coming through. So I think it's something that we need to be looking at. How are we going to handle it? Because will the grid support it? Is PSE taking charge of this, and are they doing something?
Perhaps what I should do is put that in our work program and do some research and share that with the Planning Commission so you can do some study. I'll send some websites to you, some links, and we can all get more informed on how the electric car industry plans to provide the infrastructure they need. Is that planned to be done on private sites, or is it all public, and how that works?
I just wasn't sure how they would, if the utilities are going to be doing it, okay, and they're getting the funding for it, but at the same time, it encompasses the developers. There's got to be some requirement out there for them to install those charging stations within their development. I would think that would be. David, I think you're. Go ahead.
Blaine Oborn, Carver City Administrator. I think CAC has probably came on too. We've both been exposed to this on the Island Regional Transportation Planning Organization, and they started some early discussions on there. But like David Cool mentioned, we can bring that to you, and CAC, you're welcome to add to my comments.
Yes, I was going to bring up, so the Island RTPO Regional Transportation Planning Organization, which is basically a group of that is formed by all the jurisdictions that's impacted by transportation on Island County. So you have all the cities on the island, and then you have the state and the county and the Navy and so on. So IRTPO actually had a study done about a year ago, I think, on electric vehicle charging stations and what should the Island County plan on for its infrastructure. And so that plan has actually locations suggested and the type of charging stations that would be recommended along that stretch to support electric vehicle through Island County. So that is some of the suggestions and policies that came out of the plan is related to public infrastructure. Like you mentioned, private entities and private developers taking on electric vehicle charging will be based on their need and, market demand would push some of that. Some of the recent news that came about when we were ending that study is there was some sort of technology that was going to get an ISO standard, international standard organization, I think, where they kind of standardize a product so that multiple users can use it. So they were talking about some sort of a charging plate. If it were standardized and could be set in parking spaces, then electric vehicles could have a sort of wireless charging attached to it, and then they could use that as charging. And so that technology is advancing. So we'll see a lot of that technology change. And I think for the private sector and for private parking lots or for apartment complexes, I think the market will drive some installation of that infrastructure when that demand gets there. But from a public infrastructure standpoint, the Island County or the IRTPO is already planning to have already planned for locations along Highway 20, at least to serve some sort of at least the main infrastructure down the island. But we can bring back some information to you and share some links, as David mentioned, to get the Planning Commission updated on all of that.
Thank you, CAC. Yeah, because I just read that, I guess, Island Transit just received a grant to purchase, I think the grant amount of $7 million, to purchase some electric vehicles and charging stations. So I would assume that they would be doing something down in the transportation facility down on the waterfront, at that facility. But where they get the power to and from, that's another cost. But, I'd like to stay on top of it if we can. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Seeing none, I'll close this meeting. It's now